On March 2, 2023, Alec Murdaugh was convicted of killing his wife and youngest son, bringing an end to the century-long hold his family had on South Carolina's Lowcountry. But the wild details of Alec's case are only a small part of the Murdaugh family's strange and twisted history. Alec Murdaugh is, by this point, the most infamous member of the Murdaugh family, but in Hampton County, South Carolina, where they built their dynasty, he is by no means the most well-known or the most powerful. Alec was just one in a long line of Murdaughs who had figured out how to use the law to his advantage. The first, that was Randolph Murdaugh Sr., who opened his own law firm in 1910. Over the course of the next decade, Randolph Sr. held various positions around Hampton, and by 1920, he was elected solicitor of South Carolina's 14th Circuit, essentially taking on the role of a district attorney for an area that covered 5 counties. That meant that Randolph Sr. had the power to decide who and who not to prosecute for crimes. And while he wasn't known to be a lawbreaker, Randolph Sr. did use the power of his position to his advantage. He had a habit of referring people his office was prosecuting to his own law firm for representation, a tactic the New York Post called a kind of dubious double-dipping that ensured he got rich while working the low-paying job of county solicitor. Randolph Sr. also used his influence to ensure his son, Randolph Jr., Buster, would succeed him as solicitor in 1940. Buster remained solicitor until 1986, when his own son, Randolph III, took office. He'd be there until 2006.
For over a century, the Murdaughs were law and order here in the 14th Circuit.
If you want to know who really put the Murdaughs on the map, for better or worse, you've got to take a long, hard look at Buster. While his father might have used his position as solicitor to enrich himself financially, Buster took things to a whole new level. He's been described as being bigger than life, but also vindictive, and according to the New York Post, ran the Lowcountry as his own personal fiefdom. In Jason Ryan's Swamp Kings, The Story of the Murdaugh Family of South Carolina and a Century of Backwoods Power, an attorney is quoted as saying, "There are 2 types of laws in South Carolina, the laws on the books and Buster's laws."
If Buster Murdaugh liked you, he tried to help you every way he could. If Buster didn't like you, he'd try to hurt you.
Buster had a flair for the dramatic in the courtroom, and he was, by all accounts, heavily focused on the win, regardless of the cost. A 2019 The State article notes that Buster had been criticized by the South Carolina Supreme Court for what they called egregious jury arguments during death penalty cases. But Buster wasn't exactly holding himself to the same standard as he held those he prosecuted. He was involved in numerous controversies over the course of his time in office. In 1945, he fathered a child with a married woman. He later on allegedly admitted to trying to have her killed. In 1956, he was actually indicted on federal charges. He'd allegedly been at the head of a bootlegging ring and tried to convince a whiskey maker to move production so he wouldn't be arrested. Buster was also rumored to have helped keep his brother Johnny from suffering any legal ramifications for his own alleged crimes. Of course, nothing ever came of any of it. Just prior to Buster taking office, his father, Randolph Sr., had spent an evening playing poker with a friend. It was around 1 a.m. on July 19, 1940, according to the Associated Press, when Randolph Sr. left his friend's house and stopped his car at a nearby railroad crossing. The freight train's engineer later testified that Randolph Sr. had seemed to wave from his car while he was stopped near the tracks. Then the car moved forward onto the tracks before stopping again. The train hit Randolph Sr.'s car so hard that, according to the Hampton County Guardian, the impact hurled the automobile approximately 900 feet up the track. There were rumors about Randolph Sr.'s deteriorating health in the months before the crash. He'd reportedly been suffering from kidney failure, and questions arose as to whether or not his accident had actually been intentional. Regardless, Randolph Sr.'s death was ruled an accident. Buster took over his position as solicitor, and the first thing he did was sue the Charleston and Western Carolina Railway Co. for $100,000 over his father's death. That suit was settled out of court, but it was the start of a trend. According to Forbes, between 1992 and 2002, the Murdaugh family's law firm went up against the railway company, now known as CSX, 4 dozen times, winning over $18.8 million through personal injury lawsuits. Buster's son Randy once joked, "A train killed my grandfather in 1940, and they have been killing our people ever since." If the number of lawsuits the Murdaugh family's law firm filed against CSX seems unbelievable, well, it kind of is. But there's a reason they were so successful in their litigation, and it had to do with a not-so-common South Carolina state law on the books at the time. In most states, personal injury lawsuits have to be filed in one of 2 places: the county where the accident happened or where the company that's being sued is headquartered. Not so in South Carolina. There, the only thing that was required was that a company did business, in any regard, in the county the lawsuit was filed in. Because CSX had tracks that ran ran through Hampton County, it could be sued in Hampton County for any accident that occurred in any place. Before the law was changed in the early 2000s, the Murdaughs used this legal loophole to make millions, but it wasn't the only shady practice they employed. According to the New York Post, in 2007, Alec took the brain-injured victim of a car crash to court for reckless driving. The only problem was that the teenager Alec decided to sue wasn't actually responsible for the accident. He had crashed into a semi that had been parked blocking the entire road, but he did have something the truck driver didn't: insurance, which meant more money for Alec.
He's always been one to scheme and manipulate.
The boating accident that killed Mallory Beach in February 2019 put Paul Murdaugh's name in the headlines, but it seemed it was only a matter of time before the youngest Murdaugh was forced to face his bad behavior. According to the Times, he was known to some as Little Dylan Klebold after the Columbine shooter. His closest friends have said that Paul had issues with alcohol, and when he drank, he became a different person.
It wasn't Paul anymore, it was just, hey, that's Timmy.
In Netflix's Murdaugh Murders, A Southern Scandal, Paul's former girlfriend, Morgan Dowdy, opened up about their relationship, which she described as abusive, both verbally and physically.
When it was good, it was really good. But when it was bad, it was really bad.
But Paul was also being shielded by his family from any consequences for his actions. Dowdy recalled an incident from 2017 in which Paul demanded to drive home from a Christmas party drunk. When he lost control of the truck and drove into a ditch, Dowdy tried to call 911, but Paul stopped her and contacted his grandfather instead. From there, Randolph, Alec, and Paul's mom Maggie showed up and immediately cleared the truck of Paul's guns and empty beer cans. After the 2019 boating incident, Paul again called his grandfather. According to court documents, Alec stopped police from even questioning Paul that night, and Paul was never given a field sobriety test. Paul wasn't the only Murdaugh with substance abuse issues. During Alec's trial, his lawyers dropped a bomb. For years, he'd been struggling with opioid addiction, paying up to $50,000 a week on drugs.
So you're taking 60 a day or something like that?
There were days where I took more than that.
Alec's drug use seemed to be something of an open secret. According to Dowdy, the Murdaughs' housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, found a bag of pills taped under Alec's bed in 2018. A month before Maggie and Paul were killed in 2021, Paul left a voicemail for Alec saying that Maggie had also found pills. At that same time, records show that Maggie had searched Google for pill descriptions matching the oxycodone Alec later admitted to being addicted to. Over the years, Alec had been embezzling money from his law firm and its clients to fund his habit, over $12 million according to prosecutors. The law firm eventually figured out what was happening though. In September 2021, Alec resigned, and in October, the firm, called PMPED at the time, sued him over the missing money. He eventually pleaded guilty to 22 federal counts, including money laundering and conspiracy to commit wire and bank fraud. In February 2018, the Murdaughs told authorities they found Gloria Satterfield, their housekeeper of 20 years, at the bottom of their steps.
911 emergency. My housekeeper has fallen and her head is bleeding.
She'd allegedly tripped over their dogs and fallen. After she died, Alec did what any Murdaugh would do in that situation. He convinced her family to file a wrongful death claim against his insurance. The idea was that the settlement would go to Satterfield's children, which sounds like a noble thing to do on Alec's part, except the settlement didn't go to Satterfield's kids. The $4.3 million went straight into Alec's pocket, presumably to fund his drug habit. Alec later testified that he'd made up the story about his dogs, but the question remains, how did Satterfield die? Well, there are rumors.
It's just super weird that within the same year she had found Alec's drugs, told Paul. Paul was forcing his dad to detox.
Gloria Satterfield, they pushed her down the stairs. That was no accident. That was on purpose.
In 2021, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED, opened an investigation into Satterfield's death, and by 2022, plans were made to have her body exhumed. As of 2025, though, there haven't been any new developments in the case. It is worth noting that her family has stated they don't believe Satterfield's death was the result of foul play. Satterfield's death isn't the only one people still have questions about. It isn't even the strangest. That would be the July 2015 death of Stephen Smith, a 19-year-old boy whose body was found in the middle of the road, the victim of an apparent hit-and-run. The only thing was that there were no typical signs of a hit-and-run accident, no skid marks, no injuries consistent with being hit by a car. In fact, officers noted that it looked like Smith had been shot. Thomas Moore, who had been on scene with the highway patrol at the time, told 48 Hours, "The consensus when I got there, speaking with the coroner, the first words out of his mouth was, 'This is not a hit and run. This is a murder.' It was even suggested that Smith's body had been left in the road after he'd been killed, but the medical examiner said otherwise. The conclusion of Smith's autopsy was that he had been hit by a car. His mother, Sandy, didn't believe it.
He had some defense wounds on him. His shoes were still on.
She hired a private investigator to dig into things, and one of the first names that came up in his investigation was Buster Murdaugh, Alec's oldest son. The exact nature of Buster's relationship with Smith is unclear, although there were rumors at the time that the pair might have been romantic, or that Paul had been somehow involved with Smith's death.
2, maybe 3 young men were in a vehicle. Guess they were attempting to mess around with him or something like that.
Smith's case wound up going cold, but then Paul and Maggie Murdaugh's deaths brought it back into the public eye, and SLED announced that it would be looking into it. In 2023, Smith's body was exhumed, and a new autopsy was performed. Dr. Michelle Dupree, the forensic pathologist hired to do the examination, backed up the original findings, confirming Smith had not been shot during an interview with 48 Hours. She also said that she believed he died where his body was found. Buster has remained adamant that he had nothing to do with Smith or his death, and there is no evidence tying him to the crime. Who actually was responsible for Smith's death, though, remains a mystery.